い全国大会目指して頑張ってみたいかあの若い頃の気持ちを取り落とせたら良いのにもしよろしければ行きましょうかねまりがま舞う街にその時間楽しいとしに行くもしかして知ってるのやのととすがり出会うやなものって答えそうかもしれない知りて素晴らしいものそれは救いの旅路だ我々のはすべてをいてこれは愛の僕ら狙って忘れましょう成長の苦悩世界を恋になり雨のアウハウと叫んで気合い入れよう願いの願うの今日の今日のベケーション今日
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station's Kyoto Vacation, an anime podcast brought to you by Sean Chapman.
And Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to kick back, relax, and talk about some anime this week on the show. We continue Part 8, our special Part 8 of our Kyoto Vacation. This summer, too, could be that summer by doing something we had yet to do for our Kyoto Vacation. That's right, we went to the movie theater, because today we are talking about the latest movie in KyoAni's lineup and the latest entry in the Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid franchise. It's Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, the movie. A lonely dragon wants to be loved.
Indeed it is. And this is an interesting little film. I'm curious what you thought of it, Sean. It's obviously, this is following up on the 2 seasons of the show, and I went back and re-listened to the podcast we did about those episodes from the end of our Kyoto Vacation season. And I think this is interesting because on paper, this movie doubles down on everything I said I didn't like in the 2nd season of the anime, but I actually liked this movie a fair bit.
Yes, I like the movie quite a lot too. I still think that the best version of this series is the original season by Takemoto Yasuhiro.
Yes.
The late great Takemoto Yasuhiro. But I do think what this movie does, partially because it has this sort of one big story arc to adapt from the manga that it does in a single movie. I think it leans into the things that Ishihara Tatsuya's kind of version of the show and kind of vision of the franchise had, and it feels like it's more like his version of it rather than him having to do this sort of like finalizing a version of a show that was started by a different artist. That obviously they had a lot of similarities and they had a long working history, but they're ultimately, him and Takemoto were fairly different directors with different styles and different interests. And I do think that this movie gets to just be an Ishihara Tatsuya movie. And some of like the weird kind of quirky elements of this franchise that were very much part of Takemoto's style are not so much present in the movie, but they're replaced by other things that are just as good and just as interesting and just as compelling. And I think that that's what makes this a much better, kind of more fulfilling experience than what season 2 was.
Yeah, I think we're in lockstep on this. We hadn't talked about this beforehand, but it sounds like we had the same experience. I mean, from the opening moments, Ishihara's like storyboarding style and voice comes through so fucking strongly that like there's just an authorial stamp on this, and it is not the stamp that I love most in the Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid universe. But I do think compared to Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S, which was the 2nd season, which was Ishihara's season, which was still very good, but I think just leaned into like the more madcap and the action and the lore in a way that I don't think played as well for TV. And then I think there's also that exactly what you were describing of whose show isn't fully determined yet. And I think this movie just comes much more fully into Ishihara's voice. And I think, Ishihara is really, really good at this, and he's really good at movies in particular. And so this is a pretty good movie.
Yes, yeah. It's definitely not like, if we're putting it in the KyoAni movie tier list, it's not in that sort of like upper category of like the all-time masterpiece movies like A Silent Voice or Disappearance of Suzumiya Haruhi, that kind of level, or Violet Evergarden the movie, those like really just incredible like you have to see those movies kind of movies. This is more in line with something like Love Chunibyo and Other Delusions Take on Me, or I would say the Sound Euphonium movie, Our Promise, A Brand New Day, or whatever the fucking weird title, English title of that movie was, Shikaino Finale in Japanese. This is definitely at that tier where it's like, it's a really solid movie. If you like the franchise, it's well worth watching because it does a very good, like, job of it. But it is not necessarily that, like, oh, this is a transcendental level experience. With KyoAni has made multiple movies that are in that category. So that's kind of like where I would classify it, is in that very solid, very compelling. If you like the show, it's a great like addition to that overall show. But if you're not someone who has seen the show or not someone who really likes the show, this would not be a movie that I would recommend someone go see.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think also, like, the story that they, chose for this movie is also very well movie-shaped. It does not have the issue the Sound Euphonium movie had. For me and for other people, I don't think you had this issue of it feeling like a season of TV in 90 minutes instead of 12 episodes. This does feel very movie-shaped, and it allows Ishihara to indulge in a lot of his proclivities for, like, insane action and way over-the-top production values, but also some of the quieter, more sensual stuff that I think is very part and parcel to that whole style. And so, hey, it was a good night at the movies, and this movie looks really fucking good up there on the big screen. It is quite the production.
Yes, but it's also like a lean production for a movie. It's one of those of where like you look at it and you're like, this thing just goes toe to toe with any other animated movie. But the list of credits is very svelte for this film compared to something like a Kimetsu no Yaiba, Infinity Castle, or certainly like the Chainsaw Man movie or something like that.
Yeah.
I always enjoy looking through the credits and you're like, this is a like manageable, reasonable number of people that worked on this movie. I mean, the movie was made over the course of like a year. And then you look at the credits for a lot of other animated movies, you're like, this is a small army that has made this film.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that's always really, really impressive about KyoAni is how much they hit like above their weight class in this very crazy way.
Absolutely. I mean, no, there are action cuts in here that are on par with anything in Infinity Castle or the Chainsaw Man movie that came out this week. And that's kind of crazy considering what this movie is and that it is operating at just a completely different like level of budget and manpower.
Yes. Yeah, so it's a very, very enjoyable movie. And I was happy I could go see it, even if these bastards put it out over here on a Monday, which is just evil. Oh, it was a lovely day.
You always say this like they're doing this to spite you. It's because movie theaters do not allow films that are this small to come out on the weekends, because the weekends are where they do their big business on big releases, and they probably have contracts for those screens with the studios that would disallow them from letting this out on a like Monday or a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's why these come out on Mondays. I'm sorry, but it is just the nature of the American. Blame like Disney for this, not Crunchyroll.
I don't know. They're all teacher racists. That's just how I think of it. I mean, I got home from this movie and it was literally past the time I normally go to bed because I have to get up at 5 a.m. It's just like just evil to have to go see a movie on like 7:20 p.m. on a Monday night. It's just fucked up.
Well, that's your life choices, Sean.
Yes, well,
I'm kidding.
But luckily, my life choices have led me to some things that aren't always great, but it did lead me to Kyoto Vacation, and that is fantastic. So let's go through our notes document. My notes in terms of like the broad background for the development of this movie is very thin because obviously the movie it came out a bit ago in Japan, but it literally just came out earlier this week in America. But I did go through, when we go to our crew section for each of the major kind of members of the production crew, I pulled some elements from some interviews that were on the official website for the movie. So we have some note stuff to talk about, but the background of the movie is very simple. First, just as a kind of general recap to remind people of what we're talking about when we're talking about Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, this series is based on a manga that was started by the mangaka Cool Kyo Shinja, or Believer in the Faith of Cool is what that name would literally translate to. The manga started in 2013, and it's ongoing. It has released 17 volumes to date. It's Cool Kyo Shinja's longest-running manga at this point. They've done quite a few different series. KyoAni began their adaptation with the first season in 2017, and that was directed by Takemoto Yasuhiro. Work began on a follow-up season, but that was brutally interrupted by the arson attack, which took the life of Takemoto alongside many others at KyoAni, which happened in 2019. At that point, Ishihara Tatsuya stepped in. He became the director for the show and finished what was called Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S, the second season. That finished releasing in 2021. Although Ishihara left Takemoto's credit as series director posthumously, that credit still exists in the movie, which is cool to see, even though obviously Takemoto would not have had any connection to this film at all. He did, do lots of work on Dragon Maid S before the arson attack happened. But so I like that they left that credit there for the film. Ishihara then, at that point, he went on to make Sound Euphonium 3. Sound Euphonium 3 wrapped up production in July 2024. The show was released, finished releasing the sound in July 2024, and that was kind of where Ishihara was the last time we visited him. In September 2024, it was announced that Ishihara was directing a movie follow-up to Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, which is called Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid Samishikaria no Ryu, or its official title in English is A Lonely Dragon Wants to Be Loved. Like The Lonely Dragon would be a more like literal translation of that subtitle. This adapts and expands on the story from Volume 8 of the manga, which is broadly speaking around where the TV series left off. I haven't like read the whole manga or anything, but just kind of like skimming through it, I've noticed like several episodes of things that I remembered from S in Volume 6. So clearly like they're picking up around there. Obviously the big difference is that this is a like long serialized arc, which was something that was not really present in the series previously. And that's very true of the manga. It takes up most of that volume. They've obviously expanded on it and made it an even bigger story for it to fit the full length of the movie. The movie released in Japan on June 27th. The critical reception of the movie was highly positive, and the movie made about 500 million yen. That 500 million yen stat I got is from the official KyoAni X account. Most of the box office tracking sites say 480 million. I don't know what that discrepancy is, but we can say basically 500 million yen. That's its domestic run. While that's not, breaking any crazy records, we're not talking about Infinity Castle or the Chainsaw Man movie or anything. It is a really good result for this kind of fairly niche anime film. For reference, Sound Euphonium, the movie Our Promise, A Brand New Day, that's the full title of that film. In English, that movie made 320 million yen, right? So you're talking like 300 to 500 million yen is a respectable pull for a movie of this scale. Again, keep in mind, this is a much, much lower budget animated film than those like really big movies you think about, like a Infinity Castle.
And like these movies are also more reliant even on like the limited edition Blu-ray sales later on down the line and that sort of thing. Yes. And this is just, hey, this has been part of KyoAni's business model going back to Disappearance of Suzumiya Haruhi, and they've pretty much always done well with these. There's a couple of movies that have like done lower, but even then they've been like critically acclaimed, like the Tamako Market movie or something. And so it's fine.
Yes. And yes, like there's if you want to go into the like brand marketing tie-ins and collaborations and the
yes.
cafe, branded cafe for the movie. There's like a huge big marketing campaign that happens with all kinds of crazy merchandising and stuff. KyoAni is very, very, very good at that, and they've got a very dedicated fan base. So yes, like if you want to go through the official website for the movie and look at all the different things they did to market the movie, there's going to be like a concert for the Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid music that's happening in like January 2026. There's like a whole bunch of shit that they're doing to like bring energy back and make money through the franchise. But anyways, that was the Japanese release was June 27th. Crunchyroll released the movie over here in America for a special event screening on October 20th, which again is a Monday because they hate public school teachers. And that I'm not saying Crunchyroll, I'm saying the world, which I think is an accurate statement.
That's a very, America. Japan loves their public school teachers. They treat them very well. So it wouldn't be a problem over in Japan. But here, yeah, fuck them.
Yes, but yes, it was 7:20 p.m. on a Monday night. It is a testament to how good the movie is that I was able to stay awake because I wasn't able to take my customary 4 p.m. nap. And all the things I have to do in order to manage my life of waking up at 5 in the fucking morning for my job. That is a very exhausting process. So it's a great movie because I watched it from start to finish. I was enthralled. I very much enjoyed it. And it is a testament to all those things that I was able to do that on a Monday fucking night.
Well, wonderful.
All right, so that's our brief little history section. Let's get into the crew where I've got some more fun little details here. So again, we still have our series director credit is still on the movie for Takemoto Yasuhiro. That is obviously at this point a totally posthumous credit. But of course, he's the one who led the team that envisioned how this whole series would exist in animation. So obviously his thumb is there in a general sense still in the whole aesthetic and style of the show. But in terms of the actual director for the film, we of course have Ishihara Tatsuya, and he is also the sole storyboard artist credited for the movie.
Which you can tell. Oh
Yes,
my God.
yeah.
These are the most Ishihara storyboards. Like, the first thing that happens in the movie is this metaphor about the cuckoo bird, and then these, like, insert shots as, like, Kobayashi is, like, feeding Kanna of the cuckoo. And it's like, that is the most Ishihara thing you could do in a storyboard. All the scenes, like, in cafes look like they're out of Haruhi. The action scenes are right out of Love, Chunibyo, and Other Delusions. That was one of my favorite things, was just like, oh yeah, no, this is Ishii, because we haven't seen something where he did storyboards to this degree in a while, and I just love seeing his voice, because he is so good at this.
Yes, it's like you could definitely feel, as you're saying, in all those places, his artistic presence in the storyboarding. Again, by far the project he's done before that I would draw like the clearest connection to is Take On Me, the Love, Chunibyo, and Other Delusions movie, just in terms of the style of action, the kind of the way the melodrama is presented, and that just like really going for the heartstrings, like really big, bold emotions that this movie is going for, which is fairly different to the kind of more off-kilter, quirky nature of the Takemoto Yasuhiro season of the show. But it matches what the story of this movie is so well, that it just works great. In terms of other people, basically everyone else working on this movie are the people from the show. So series composition is Yamada Yuka. That is the same head writer from the TV series. Character design and chief animation director is once again Kadawaki Miku, who was both those roles on the TV show. Just as a recap, Kadawaki did character designs for Beyond the Boundary, where she was also chief animation director. She did character designs for Amagi Brilliant Park and Sudene. One slight difference here is that we did have in the show, Maruki Nobuaki was the chief animation director. And Maruki and Kadawaki had been a team in that role, where Maruki was the chief animation director and Kadawaki was the character designer on both Amagi Brilliant Park and Sudene. Maruki served as one of the 6 regular animation directors for the film. I don't know if like they maybe were working more on City the Animation at this point, or KyoAni's next project, which we'll talk about at the end of this episode. But he did not have that like full chief animation director role. That was Kadawaki did both. I've got a couple comments here from one of the interviews I found on the movie. So this is Kadawaki Miku talking about character design. She says, when we started production for the movie, we incorporated the existing designs and adjusted them using the most recent volumes from the manga as reference and updating the characters and their expressions. Since Kobayashi-san and Todo have a lot of cool scenes, I wanted to express their coolness to the utmost extent, so we deliberately adjusted their height to make them taller. This interview was a stage event that had Ishihara, the director, there. So he chimed in, for the characters, we of course reference the source material, but the style of the manga has changed so much that we of course incorporate the changes from the latest volumes. Kadawaki continued, from the director, we had the direction to pull out more of Kobayashi-san's cuteness. So we made her clothes a casual pants style, which I will say I love her shirt for the first half of this movie, which is just the word Jiujin, which is free person, in like simple text on like a white t-shirt, and I want to get that fucking t-shirt because it's really good. Anyways, Kadawaki continues with the interview. On the assumption that Kobayashi-san was buying Kanna's clothes, we gave her clothes that Kobayashi-san would think was trendy. To be clear, it's only what Kobayashi-san thinks is trendy, not necessarily what is actually trendy. Ishihara said, Kobayashi-san gives a strong impression because of her attitude and manner of speaking, but in the end, she's just a human. I wanted to express what was appealing about that humanness, which was different from the dragons. I thought she wouldn't ever actually wear a skirt, but I wanted her in something loose and relaxed like a skirt. Kadawaki finished the interview saying, I felt that Saikawa, Kanna's friend, always wore good clothes, so I had her wear something cute but refined. Elma usually wears strange t-shirts, but in this movie she was in a scene where Toru brought her out to a cafe, so I gave her something stylish. Her hairpins are tricolored dango, but this was something proposed by Takashi Naomi-san, the color designer. I originally envisioned them as a normal gold accessory, so when she proposed that change, I wondered, is she a genius?
That's great. No, the character designs in this movie and all of the like clothing in particular is so good.
Yes.
And it was one of my favorite things just to notice. I mean, that's often something you'll get in a movie where you don't have to worry about like what is the regular costume going to be for 12 episodes or something, so you can experiment with that. And it's definitely one of the pleasures of this movie is seeing all the costumes everyone's in.
Yes, yeah, I definitely, and it was cool seeing these comments of just like how, much thought is put into, for some of these characters like Saikawa are only in a couple of scenes in the movie, but everybody has obviously like a design lift. I mean, you have Takia, the Nakamura Yuichi character. He's only in, I think, maybe one whole scene in the movie at Kobayashi's workplace, but everyone has like an updated design. Everybody's wardrobe is updated. Yeah, it's really well done. Next up, we have art director. Again, this is the same person from the TV show, is Kasai Shingo. And here's the comment I had from that interview. Kasai Shingo said, in order to naturally bring out the feeling that we went to another world, obviously talking about the designing of the dragon world in the movie, we designed strange new plants and adjusted things like the color of the sky. But I felt that if we went too far with it, it would overpower the character's presence or make it hard for the audience to enter that world. So we tried to make the plants something that almost seemed like they could be from our world, and in certain moments the sky would get closer to the colors you'd expect from our world. I hope that by doing so we were able to help the characters stand out while also expressing the believable sensation that we had entered another world. And then Ishihara chimed in, I made the request that some plants would fly. For this we had plants almost like Chinese silver grass, which was an awkward translation where I had to look up what Suzuki is, what it's called in Japanese, and it's got some, elaborate technical name in English. But I guess it's commonly called Chinese silvergrass. And they had this sort of Chinese silvergrass-esque plant fired out cottony fluff, which flew. And doing that gave depth to the normally flat space of the anime. This is a sort of skill or technique, saying this is a kind of technique that we use to create that sense of depth. Specifically trying to emphasize that in the other world rather than in the regular world is the implication behind that statement.
It definitely stands out because the dragon world by necessity is more interesting in this movie than it is in the show. I mean, we only go there very briefly in the show, so it has to be. And so much of this film is set there, but there is some very inventive design. It kind of looks like it kind of reminded me at some points of the demon world in Dragon Ball Daima, where it was kind of this fun hellscape. I don't know how else to say it, but it was this fun fantasy, demon realm. And I enjoyed seeing that.
Yeah, you have the whole sequence where Kobayashi is chased by the crazy plants and stuff,
yes.
and the big trees that have come alive. So you do just get this fun, that kind of alienness of the other world, but it's kind of in that madcap area that the Ishihara Tatsuya really likes. And I like that comment about trying to use different elements like the plants to create a greater sense of depth in the image for the dragon world in order to distinguish it aesthetically from our world and create that sense of the vastness of it, because I think that that's very successful in the film. The next credit I got here is the color design. Again, the same person from the TV show, which is Takahashi Naomi. I really thought this comment was interesting. She talks about the scene at the end of the movie. She says, the scene where Kanna cries at the end is within this work the most emotional scene, and one where the background and the atmosphere of that moment had to be beautiful. So in order to have those feelings and that beauty stand out more, we incorporated various colors into her tears. Conversely, in the scene where Saikawa tries to stop Kanna and cries, those tears were solid colors, and by doing that, we connected them closer to what was seen in the TV show with Saikawa's almost gag-like affection for Kanna. Truthfully, when I watched the finished scene, it turned into something even more moving than I had expected.
That's really cool. I wouldn't have been able to notice that just looking at this, or the one time I saw the movie.
Yes.
But saying it's bringing out images from that, and that scene is fantastic. So very cool to hear that. And I like that you highlighted the color designer, because we don't always do that, and they do really important work.
Yes, and especially for this movie, it feels like they got to stretch their legs by going to the crazy fantasy world, doing all these crazy energy blasts and stuff like that. The colors are especially vibrant in this movie, which is very cool. In terms of music composer, they were not involved in any of the interviews I found. It's the same main person from the show, Ito Masumi. One thing to note about the TV show is that there are two credited composers, Ito Masumi and Koto Ringo. They're credited on both seasons, but it's very clear if you look at the credits for individual tracks. Ito Masumi did a lot more of the soundtrack of season 1. Koto Ringo did a lot more of the soundtrack for season 2. I always felt that the season 1 soundtrack was better. And I think while this is not, I didn't notice it pulling some of those major themes I remember from season 1. Especially, it's a bit more in that style of season 1, so I did enjoy the music quite a bit. So it's the same person from there. In terms of unit directors, we have Ishihara Tatsuya, Kitanohara Noriyuki, and Miyaki Ryo. One point on Kitanohara Noriyuki, he was at one of those stage greeting interview events, and so I do have some comments here. So Kitanohara, talking about unit direction, he said, unit direction is, to put it simply, the role of giving advice and ideas to the director on how things could be portrayed or depicted. Within that, the director himself, who's truly a big fan of anime, so surely there'd be things like big explosions and battles. I don't know if he was overwhelmed with the feeling of finally, in terms of like, finally we get to make a Kobayashi-san movie. But I feel like there are a lot more scenes like that than in the source material that he left.
This is such a good calling out of Ishihara's whole style. He loves the big explosions and battles. It's great.
Which is funny because he doesn't direct battle shows, yet somehow they still find their way into every show he makes. Anyways, Kitano continued, at that point, so the audience doesn't get bored, I thought about how to adjust the designs and colors and such. More than just increasing our repertoire, I believe photography director Ueda-san will have things to say about this. But I discussed and worked with the Finnish animation team to make sure that we would have a satisfying, flashy picture for the photography department. Ishihara picked up a comment there where he said, Kitano also participated in key animation of the action scenes. When he did, he was very particular about things like the grading of colors and the characters' movements. He really gave a lot of ideas. For example, in the scene where Toru and Kimun Kamui fight at the end of the movie, at a spot where I just put bites into the storyboard, he said, well, there's no way that would hurt Kimun Kamui, and so he added a giant fire blast. Which I assume is just Kitano going, oh, Ishihara will love this shit. Putting a giant explosion
this is where the whole KyoAni touch matters, right? Because they've worked together for like 30 years now, maybe more.
Yes.
I mean, he has to have worked on everything Ishihara has ever directed, right? Like, he's been there for everything. And so, yes, like, of course, if anyone's going to understand bites needs to be bigger and he will like this, that's great. If Kitano is on board, you just know it's going to be good. He's always great.
Yeah, and I do like, we're getting to this section, Kitano pops up, like, in offhand comments from Ishihara in this specific interview, like, a lot, even in some things that I didn't bring in because they didn't fit anywhere in the notes, but it's just clear how important Kitano is in the overall hierarchy at KyoAni, because obviously he's the kind of guy who has never directed a full show, because I think clearly he doesn't want to do that. I assume if he had wanted to do that, he could have done that forever ago.
Right.
But, you know, he's so experienced and he's so good at what he does with animation, storyboarding, episode direction. You know, he did 3 episodes. He directed more episodes than anyone else on City the Animation. It's just, you know, he's one of those top dogs, and it was cool just to see his name just kept popping up in these interviews, even in questions he was not directly involved in, which just, I think, shows like how substantial his influence is, even on a project like this where he was the unit director. We have our third unit director for the movie is Miyake Ryo. He wasn't present for any of the interviews I saw, but I want to just like shout him out because it's interesting. He's really started to rise to prominence in the modern era of KyoAni, the kind of the post-2019 era of KyoAni. His first episode that he directed was for Sound Euphonium 3, where that was one where he directed one episode that he didn't storyboard, and then there was a second episode later that he directed and storyboarded. It was that kind of pattern we've seen before. And he also did 2 episodes of City the Animation. He did episodes 4 and episode 9, and he did unit direction for this movie. So he's clearly, you know, kind of like Yamada Naoko from Days Past or Yamamura. You know, we have these like artists who kind of come up and end up going up in these roles where they start in key animation or something like that. They end up doing an episode that they direct that they don't storyboard. They then do an episode that they direct and storyboard. And then oftentimes, and we've seen this with multiple people, like Yamamura Takuya did, that was this exact same way, becomes a unit director on a movie. And then typically at that point, they then will move on to probably directing their own show. And so that would be something I would not be surprised if in the next couple of years, Miyake Ryo was doing a new show at KyoAni just based on the way he's been rising up the ranks in various projects he's participated in.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just love seeing these new names and seeing where they're coming to prominence. And also really impressive that both Kitano and Miyake were able to do this and City the Animation at the same time, because they were not doing like small efforts on either of those shows. They were doing a lot of work. Yes.
I mean, it's the craziest thing about KyoAni is how tight that staff is. And if they're doing multiple projects, almost every single person is working on all those projects. Like you know, it's not
unless you're the top director. Like Ishidate Taichi isn't on this, and Ishihara Tatsuya isn't on City. But other than that, everyone works on everything.
Yes, yeah, it's pretty nuts. Director of photography for the movie is Ueda Hiroki, again, same as the TV show. The comment from the interview that they were present for was, photography is the job of putting the characters on the background and getting them to move. But at that stage, lots of effects are added. The basic thought process for the photography department is, quote, to blend the characters and background. But to add to the ambiance or sense of realism or verisimilitude, I think is kind of what I arrived at to translate this. It's Dinjinkan is the word in Japanese. It's kind of awkward to translate. I think verisimilitude is probably the best way to translate it. But in order to add to that verisimilitude, they add various filters. For example, in the scene where Kamui destroys Kobayashi's apartment, we add things like the aura of energy and the clouds of dust. Other examples of things we were particular about would be Azard's Holy Shroud or the fire effects for the dragons that might be shown even for just a few seconds. Amongst those elements, the one we focused on the most was the dragon orb that Kobayashi used to defeat Kamui. He calls it a dragon orb. I think we can all call it a spirit bomb. We know what that thing is. It uses different colors from the first frame to the last frame. We got that advice from Kitano Hara-san and ultimately chose to shift it to blue at the climactic moment. All of the colors, like its initial orange color, were arrived at through trial and error, adding different elements until we ended up with something that felt like Kobayashi-san made it. Ishihara chimed in, I give directions like, this is what I want to do, or I want you to add something like this. But really, I'm just giving a broad direction or general vision. Within those directions, they really built it up by carefully considering the essence of the piece and its characters. For me, they were endlessly helpful. And then Ueda gives an example of one of those broad directions where he says, this is a hard thing to translate. I was trying to do my best to express what's happening here. He says, when Azard was attacked by Iriru, the design of the wound on the Holy Shroud should be like, Piro, 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 Piro. That was the kind of direction we got, he laughs. It was incredibly vague, but as a creator, that does give you a kind of freedom that's very fun.
Yeah, and I mean, this is actually true of directors of photography in live action, too. I always remember there's a great anecdote from the making of the original Star Wars, where George Lucas, who had been in fully independent film mode before then, was trying to really micromanage the cameraman, who was this, like, very experienced British director of photography, and he finally sat George Lucas down and said, all you need to tell me is what you want it to look like, and I will do that. You don't need to micromanage any of the stuff. And like, so that's the point, right? Is the person who has the expertise of how to put those pieces together, you give them like, I want it to be like this, and then they can figure out the technical element of putting it together. And you hear this in animation too, particularly at KyoAni, where like the director of photography has done every project. And so, yeah, these people are very talented.
Yes, but I do like that the anecdote is like, oh, it's just like it should be like this, you know, is kind of like what that pedo 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 sound is like that's what the wound should look like. It's okay, I'll go do that, I guess. Great. Yes. And then the last person I have here, not a credit we normally add and shout out, but they were at the event and they had some cool comments. I thought, well, we should credit these people as well. Is the 3D director Yamamoto Dean. So they said, since the movie itself and the original trailer both start with a shot of clouds, I was very focused on that moment bringing the viewer into the world of Maid Dragon. And it's not just the beginning. I felt the clouds were essential to bringing out the verisimilitude. There you can see I learned how to translate that word, of what I'm calling the Top Gun scene, which is the dogfighting scene, the dragon dogfight in the clouds. I think I challenged all my abilities as a creator there. At first, I considered making them more 2D like clouds, but then I thought they would lose their sense of volume when the camera moved, so they ended up with that very realistic cumulonimbus look. Ishihara said, clouds are one important element of this movie, and we really worked hard to make sure they were perfect. Well, I say that, but I'm pretty sure Kitano Hara was more particular about that than even me, and he laughed. Yamamoto, the 3D director, adds, the dimensional gate is a different color than the TV series. The director's original idea was for it to be rainbow colored, but if the coloring was too intense, it would make the effect look crude, so we were careful in how we balanced it. And then Ishihara said, this is my favorite comment Ishihara had from all these interviews is, well, this is just my taste right now, but rather than dull, earthy colors, I've been into the kind of bright rainbow colors popular in the 70s. They effectively incorporated that idea into the dimensional gate. And I love just out of nowhere, he's like, yeah, I'm just not into that earthy shit right now. It's like, I want the cool big colors like the 70s, which is just a nice little comment.
No, that's great. And I'm glad you highlighted the 3D director because like City, the animation where I said this, I think KyoAni's 3D game has like leveled up pretty substantially in recent years. Like this is a notable, like the 3D is more visible here than in City where it is more disguised under the style of that show. But it is much more better integrated than like stuff from the 2000s or 2010s that we saw from KyoAni. And obviously with all of the action and those cloud scenes, as they say, it's very impressively done and in a way that does blend really well with KyoAni's general kind of handcrafted style. So just genuinely like huge kudos to Yamamoto Rin and anyone working on the 3D because it's taken a big step up.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I didn't even like in the movie, I just stopped noticing and thinking about it. But like and when they say that like the clouds were 3D. I'm like, oh, of course they were. Like, particularly for that Top Gun scene, it has to be. With like what they were doing in that. I do love Ishihara saying, though, in the interview, this is, I translated this very literally to catch this because I thought it just cracked me up, was when he said, clouds are one important element of this movie, as if clouds are not like one of the signature visual elements of every single KyoAni production. Like, it's so particular.
Yes.
Every KyoAni show and movie ever has like very loving shots of the sky with big dramatic clouds and usually like a plane that's cutting through them. I mean, it's just one of the most distinctive hallmark KyoAni shots ever in my mind, is like how they shoot clouds and what they do with that. And so it's like, you don't have to add of this movie. You could just say this for every single thing you've ever worked on, because it's always true, and it has always been true. The clouds are important.
I mean, if you go back to the Haruhi Endless 8, one of the main distinguishing things between those 8 episodes and the different directors is what they do with clouds,
Yes.
right? You've got crazy Death Cloud lady. She's the one who went to Nintendo later, right?
Yes.
I forget her name. But you have, everyone does clouds a little differently. And that's part of like what distinguished those 8 episodes. It's very true.
Yeah. So that's the main crew for the movie. In terms of our songs for the film, we have our opening song, Namida no Parade, or Parade of Tears, by Fana. Fana is, of course, the band that did both the openings for the TV show. You can't do a Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid thing if you do not have them do a song for it. It's like that band has such a really distinctive sound that to me is so closely tied to the aesthetic and identity of the series, it would feel like a betrayal if you got some other band to do the opening theme. And I like, and KyoAni has done this on several of their movies, I like that they have full-on openings in the movie, right? It's like a whole, like, as if it was an episode of TV show. They've got a full animated opening sequence that opens up the movie, that kind of brings you into the world and the tone of the piece. And I do like this song, and it just kind of hits the right tone immediately to be like, yes, we're back. This is Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. This is what this series is like. This is what this world is like. This is the tone of this whole thing. It really sets the mood off correctly at the beginning, that then is also very effective, because then you get, when Keenan Conway comes into the story, the tone and mood shifts really dramatically into, this is not just an episode of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, this is the movie. But this song and that whole opening sequence makes you feel like we're like beginning season 3 of the TV show, before the tone pretty dramatically shifts when the main plot really kicks into gear.
I believe Ishihara specifically has done this for every movie he's directed. Back to Disappearance of Haruhi all the way through now. They all have a theme song. And other directors haven't always used that. Like, Ishidate Taichi did not do that for Violet Evergarden. I don't think Yamada Naoko did that for Tamako Market. She might have done that for KO, and I'd have to go back and check. But, like, I do think it's something that distinguishes his films, and I always love it. I like when movies based on anime just, like, yeah, throw us a theme song. It's fun, it's a movie, not a TV show, but that's fine. I will take a theme song wherever I can get it, and this one is very good and wacky, and I like it.
Yes, absolutely. And then the ending theme, there's a lot more that goes into this one, just in terms of the background. So, it's a great song. The ending theme is Bokutachi no Hibi, or that would translate to Our Days, which is sung by Kobayashi Sachiko and composed by Kanata Okajima and Youth Case, both of whom are like well-known J-pop composers. They've just composed a shit ton of songs. But Kobayashi Sachiko, let's go into her a little bit. You might actually be familiar with her because she is very famous. She's a very, very famous and beloved Inca singer in Japan. Her list of credits is basically endless. Like, if you go, even if you go to the English Wikipedia page, it's very long. If you go to her Japanese Wikipedia page and you start scrolling down in the discography section, it is just,
oh my God. I'm doing it right now, Sean. This is like one of the longest Wikipedia pages I have ever seen.
Yes, it is. She is, she's very, very beloved. She's 71 years old. She's a very, very iconic Inca singer in Japan. She has also done some occasional acting. One credit that jumped out to me is she was, and this is when she was a child, she was in the 10th Zatoichi movie, Zatoichi's Revenge, in what was not in like insignificant role, not just like an extra, like that was a proper full role for that movie. But she's, her main career is by far her singing career. She has also typically had a vocal cameo in anime when she has done songs for anime, which is most notable in Pokemon, where she's done several songs for Pokemon, including she did the ending theme for the original Pokemon movie, Gyakushu no Mewtwo, or Mewtwo's Attack, or whatever the fuck we called it. Pokemon, the first movie, I guess we called it over here. That song in Japanese is Kaze to Isho. And in this movie, she does have a cameo in that tradition where she plays Felicitas, which is the head dragon of the team that tries to stop Toru in, again, what I call the dragon Top Gun scene. But when you have that, it's like kind of like a big feathery dragon that's leading the other ones that are trying to take her down in the big cloud scene. That is Kobayashi Sachiko voicing that. Now, the connection between Kobayashi Sachiko and Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid actually goes back a while, because in 2021, KyoAni made an April Fool's gag joke collaboration with her called Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S, where one, they made the joke that the S stands for Sachiko, like, because they had all the things it stood for, which is like smile and psycho and all these things, and one of them was Sachiko. That's not what the S stands for. And to be clear, the pun that they made is even better in Japanese, because the title in Japanese is Kobayashi Sanchi no Maid Dragon. So you have that sa and chi sound in the Japanese title. So they changed it and had the poster say Kobayashi Sachiko no Maid Dragon. And they had like a whole April Fool's joke. Now, that was 2021 for season 2. In the lead up to this movie, in April 1st, 2025, they did a sequel April Fool's joke, where they made a fake poster for the movie where they like very crudely photoshopped Kobayashi Sachiko into the poster, doing like a Kamehameha thing. And they released a comment with the poster where Kobayashi Sachiko, her comment was, "Long time no see, everyone. I finally come back to the great Kobayashi-san. This time it's the Lonely Dragon. So Kanna and I are getting wrapped up in a great battle in another world. I can't wait. Everyone, I'll be waiting at the theater. I'll give you the greatest moment of your life." And I tried to translate that as best I could, but if you can imagine Goku saying that, like, that's almost the way that she wrote it. Like, waka waka stick daze. Like, it's like, I'm super excited for this. And then Ishihara released a comment with that fake poster saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, it's KyoAni's first animation and live action mix. In a lot of ways, this will be a first for me. The protagonist Kobayashi-san will, while partially realized through CG, be mostly live action. We worked hard to have her blend in with the world and other characters, but I think the staff's hard work is finally paying off. Will Kobayashi-san be able to save Kanna? And who is the true last boss? Go to the theaters to find out." And then the following day, it was revealed that it is not entirely an April Fool's joke, because they did actually get her to do the actual ending theme for the movie, and have her do a cameo voice role in the film as well. Which she was also then, I follow the Japanese YouTube channel for KyoAni, and they pimped the shit out of this movie with Kobayashi Sachiko. She's in like a bunch of YouTube videos doing like interviews. She showed up at like one of the early screenings in a costume that looked like her dragon. That's this like big ridiculous costume. It's very fun. And it was just as I started looking up things about this woman, I just kept on learning more and more about her deep-seated connection with Kobayashi Sanchi no Maid Dragon, and I just think this whole weird saga is just fantastic.
That's awesome, and it is a great song. It's like everyone in the theater was sitting there listening to it through the end credits, because it was very, very nice.
Yeah, and it's pretty incredible to me that she's 71 years old, because she can fucking belt that thing out. Like, that is, yes. She's a hugely talented singer, but it is a very, very moving song, and I like it quite a bit. And then there is one insert song, which is the song Negai Goto, or Wish, which is by Koto Ringo, who is the co-composer for the soundtrack, right? Also was on the main show as well. I believe this plays in the ending scene with Kanna and all that stuff with Kimin Kamui, which is also a good song.
Well, awesome. Yeah, no, I'm really glad you translated all those comments from different people, Sean, because it's a fun window into the world of the Japan domestic promotion for these movies that we don't usually get a window to over here, because we don't have them coming and doing premiere screenings and YouTube videos and all of those stuff. So it's fun to see.
Yes. And if I didn't have that, it would just have been a tiny little notes document, and I couldn't let that be.
Well, there we go. Do you want to talk about some of the voice actors here and the new characters? Because obviously most of the vocalists we've talked about before, because they're from the show.
Yes, so in terms of our new characters, we've got two, I guess, really big new characters, and one that just made me smile when I realized who the voice actress was. So our big new guest star for this is Kimin Kamui, Kanna's father, who's played by Tatsuki Fumihiko, who obviously is a hugely famous voice actor. I think the most relevant role for this is that he is the most famous bad dad in the history of anime, yes. Ikari Gendo from Neon Genesis Evangelion. And it is just great casting. I mean, he's fucking awesome in everything. He's particularly really, really good. I think Kimin Kamui is just such a compelling character, because they have to do this very fine line where he can't be like Gendo. He can't be an absolutely irredeemable sack of shit, waste of a human being that honestly should have been killed the moment he was, brought into this world. Kimin Kamui has to be a guy who's like, yes, he's treated Kanna poorly, but also he doesn't know any other way to treat people. It's part of like the world that he comes from and the way he sees things and how he's been brought up. But there is, and this is something true of like this whole movie that is one of the things that's very different than the Takemoto version, where I think Ishihara's vision for the dragons is that they are deep down very similar to humans, but they have been brought up in such a different world, rather than I think Takemoto's vision for them is that his season of the show is as much a show about people like cohabitating with like a roommate as it is people cohabitating with a dog. It's like he's like, I think his show is like interested on what is it like to live with a creature that is truly different than you, that is a truly different species. I think Ishihara's vision, and you see this in how Kimin Kamui works, maybe this is also reflected in how the manga changes over time. But Kimin Kamui, the character very much is like, he feels like a person who, because of the way he's been raised, treats the world and sees things in a certain way, but really deep down, he wants to have this relationship with Kanna. He wants the same kind of warmth that she wants. And I think that Tatsuki Fumihiko just does such a good job of walking that line where you feel, from the first moment you see this guy, that he's probably bad news, but that there's something really likable about him, and that like you never want to like lose hope in him and think that like that we can repair this relationship and that something better can happen and go forward. I think it's just like a really delicate kind of characterization, and Tatsuki Fumihiko just absolutely nails it. It's a great performance.
Oh, totally. And honestly, getting Gendo for this part is kind of like when Jujutsu Kaisen Zero got, the voice actress for Shinji to do the main character in that movie.
Yes.
It's just like, it's such a direct, although this one is a little more creative because this character is not as complete a like lift of that character. But yes, like getting anime's most famous bad dad to do Kimin Kamui just lands it a certain amount of gravitas, but also like means the transformation that the character undergoes by the end, even if it is a somewhat like glacial and small transformation in degrees, like is really deeply felt. And it is just such a fantastic performance. He's one of the highlights of this movie. Like, one of my like theses with this movie is that so much of why it works is it's so down to execution, because I think if you described this film on paper to me, it would sound like a version of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid I have very little interest in. And I think it is so much of it is the various pieces of execution, and one of those is just how good Tatsuki Fumihiko is here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really great character, really great performance. Our other major new character here is Azardo, or Azad, however you're supposed to put his name into English, I don't know. He is the sorcerer, obviously working with Kimin Kamui, and he's voiced by Nobunaga Shimazaki, who we haven't actually, he's a pretty big actor these days, but we just haven't done a lot of stuff he's in. The only show we've covered that he's been in is Mahito in Jujutsu Kaisen, the kind of the bad guy, cursed spirit, that kind of becomes Itadori's kind of foil over the course of that first season. And obviously we've never done the season 2. He's in season 2 as well. Other big things you might know him from, my favorite performance of his is as Yu-Gi-Oh!, Kirito's best bud in season 3 of Sword Art Online. It's just like a great character and a great performance. Then also he's notable for me personally as he's Fujimaru Ritsuka, the main character in Fate Grand Order. So in all the animated adaptations of that game, of which there have been several, he's the protagonist of that. And this is like very much in that kind of Mahito kind of performance. I feel like Nobunaga Shimazaki is like a Hanae Natsuki or a Hiroshimano, in that he's that kind of voice actor that you get him to be one of two characters, broadly speaking. Either he's the best friend who's like really gentle and kind and very sweet, or he's an absolute piece of shit that wants everyone to think that he's their best friend and very kind and very gentle and very sweet, but actually he's like a psychopath and has some sort of brutal scheme he's trying to lay out. And those are like, you just have this kind of set of kind of young male actors in the anime industry that I feel like, generally speaking, they fall into one of two camps that they're very, very good at. And Azard is obviously the latter, where he is, he's not just evil. Well, I think he is a very sympathetic character, and I love the the climax of this movie, the kind of the dual resolutions between both his resolution and Kanna's, and his whole scene with Todo at the end is fantastic. But he is obviously like deliciously evil for long stretches of the movie, and Nobunaga Shimazaki just fucking chews that up. And you have that scene where the character just kind of, who's been very polite and very kind of like self-effacing towards people, and then he gets to reveal it for the first time. I think it's the scene with Iruru when she goes and investigates things, and the mask comes off, and he just goes fucking nuts. And you just kind of let Nobunaga chew the scenery for a while, and it's very good. Like I like this character archetype. I like this kind of performance. Nobunaga Shimazaki is very, very good at doing that kind of thing.
He very much is. I was actually kind of surprised because when I was watching the movie, I thought he had so much gravitas in his voice and was so good. Like, I thought, I must know this guy from a million things and I just can't place it. And really the only thing I directly heard him in was Jujutsu Kaisen. But I didn't remember that character that much. So it's just that he's so good. I kind of like tricked myself into thinking I must have seen him in a million things. And yeah, it's a very impressive performance.
Yes. And then the last new character I want to bring up, because again, it's just, as soon as I recognize the voice, I'm like, yes, I've loved that she's like in everything KyoAni's made since like 2016, is Takemoto Yasuhiro, is the fairy girl, who we have a cameo of a relatively minor character from season 2 of Miss Kobayashi Dragon Maid S, who's the weird little fairy guy that Kanna helped out, and he comes in to save Kobayashi, and we have his, I guess, daughter, I assume is what this character is. And Takemoto Yasuhiro, if you don't recognize that name, she's been in a bunch of KyoAni stuff. Her big early role was Lulu in Myriad Colors Phantom World, which is obviously a very similar kind of character to this in a whole bunch of ways. But she's also Sasaki Azusa in Sound Euphonium, which is Kumiko's friend from the other school. She's Luculia in Violet Evergarden, Violet's friend from the Auto Memory Doll school. And then most recently, it just absolutely incredible performance as Etchan in City the Animation. If you're doing a KyoAni production nowadays, you got to get Takemoto Yasuhiro in there. She had not yet been in Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, which was a mistake, and they found a good role for her. Because this character, obviously not a huge role in the movie, but it is a very delightful role, and I did find that character very endearing in her like weird de gozaimasu, like her weird kind of speaking habits she has. It's a nice little piece of comic relief in what is an otherwise fairly dramatic stretch of the movie.
Genuinely one of my favorite parts of this movie. I think she's great. She got a big laugh in the theater every time she spoke. Just, Takemoto Yasuhiro is one of those actresses who can just make not funny words funny. I don't know how else to say that, right? Like, she could read the phone book in a way that makes you laugh. So, absolutely.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show. So where do we want to go from here, Jonathan? Do you want to run through the returning cast? Do you want to get into the movie itself? How do you want to do this?
We don't really need to run through the returning cast. I mean, people know who they are. And honestly, outside of Kobayashi, Todo, and Kanna, most of the TV cast is not important in this movie. Like, they show up a little bit. You do have some very good Ono Daisuke moments as Fafnir, which is funny. But even then, Fafnir's in like 3 or 4 scenes. Yes. And some of the major like characters from the show either just aren't in this or are in it very, very minimally, which is fine. I mean, because, like, let's start here. This movie has a very clear focus. This is the Kanna movie, such that in the credits, Naganawa Maria, who plays Kanna, is billed first. She is billed above Kobayashi and Todo, which I thought was interesting, because you don't usually flip those things around in an anime, but I think just recognizing that Kanna is very much our focal point here, although Kobayashi is still our main character protagonist, obviously. Yeah, so this is the Kanna movie. I think it's one of the things that sells this as a movie that makes it work. Because, like, my main reaction to this film is that I think I went in expecting something more akin to, like, K-On! The movie, where K-On! The movie very much keeps the tone, the pace, the general sensibilities of K-On! The TV show. It just does it in this, like, movie-shaped package that has sort of a very cohesive thematic thrust. but it's very similar to what you get in KO the show. And because Kobayashi is also this kind of slice of lifey comedy focused thing, I thought, I had not watched any of the trailers. I knew nothing about this movie going in. I just knew it was the Kobayashi movie. And I kind of expected it would be like that we would have a lot of antics, that it would be very comedy focused. And really, this movie, it's the most different from the TV show of anything KyoAni's made a movie out of. Like, it is, at a certain point, it's a different genre. I would not really call this movie a comedy. Like, it has comedic parts, but its main goal is not to get you to laugh. It is way more action-focused. It is much more drama-focused. It has much more in terms of, like, concentrated character emotions and continuity. And I think I saw some reactions from people being disappointed that, like, you know, they went to see all their favorite Miss Kobayashi characters. And if, you know, like, if you're a big fan of, like, Ilulu or Lukoa or something, they're not in this that much, right? So, like, you're going to be a little disappointed. But I think if you are going to this just to see a good movie, like, I think it being Kanna being moved to center stage, having this very clear story through her, and then the level of execution on everything it does, from the big action scenes to the, like, intense character drama, all of that is so well done, and Ishihara is just so good at what he does in these movies that, like, again, even if I think if you describe this movie on paper to me, like someone who was not at all interested in the dragon lore in seasons 1 or 2, who didn't vibe with the zanier comedy as much as I did with the more low-key comedy in the first season, right? I think I would have expected to like this less than I did, and I think it is just, it's down to that execution, it's down to that sense of focus, and hey, KyoAni's very good at what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very much my reaction as well. I think I had a little bit more because I had seen some of the trailers of kind of what to expect. Like, I knew that the reaction out of Japan was very positive, and that also, like, it was like a movie where a bunch of people came out of the end crying, you know, because it has like a very, very touching ending, which is not what you would expect from Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. But, like, it is something where I just think that show, like, honestly, like, either version of it, whether you're looking at season 1 or season 2, I don't know how you make that show into a movie and preserve what that show is. Like, it's so not plot focused. It's not like Love Chunibyo and Other Delusions, where the central relationship between the two characters is like a big traditional adolescent love story, you know? Like, you can make a movie out of that because that is, like, the history of movies has thousands of movies that are about that. And obviously that story archetype well predates movies. But the central relationship in Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid between Toru and Kobayashi-san is, like, so weird and so unusual. It's like, obviously it's not a traditional love story in any way, shape, or form. There is a kind of love there. You know, and obviously there's a lot of, like, queer readings you can make into the series because of it having these two women who, as the leads, that obviously kind of, like, fall into these two kind of those sort of, like, you know, kind of butch and femme stereotypes and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of that there, but there's also a lot else. And again, like, my read of that original season by Takemoto is that it is so much about this kind of pondering what it is to coexist and build relationships with things that are different than you are. Even beyond it being people who are different than you. It is like things like species, right? Different species, in the sense of, like, cohabiting with something that shares or that adopts and has a completely different sensibility of what it is to live. And it's a really offbeat, kind of odd show because that's the only way you could try to kind of explore that weird space. And so the comedy in that season is very low key. It's like leaning on kind of these kind of classic daily life sort of bits, but, like, seeing how that changes when the dragon's thrown into a mix. But then it has these weird fits of almost like depression, where you get these, like, this insight into Toru and how she sees the world and what is it like for her to live amongst the humans, and her sense of disassociation with herself and her whole history and culture and all these things. Like, it's a cool season that's very weird. But none of those things you could bring into a movie. Like, beyond the fact that Takemoto is no longer with us to be able to direct that movie, I don't think he could make that movie, because that story is inherently like a low-key serialized story that either needs to be a manga that also is, like, 10-page long chapters. The manga does not have, like, big, full 20-something page chapters. They're, like, small, short chapters. It needs to be that format, or it needs to be the kind of TV format that they did. So if you're going to make the Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid movie, I think this is the way to do it. Is one, there's this story arc from the manga that is a much more like big dramatic story arc that serves as the inspiration and the basis for this. And all the major beats of this movie are in that arc from the manga, because I went through it the other day. But they expand it dramatically, like large chunks of it. There's a lot more. Like the beginning of that arc, the first probably 15 to 20 minutes of this movie are basically all original, that build up the entrance of Kimun Kamui, the sequence of Kanna being in our world before she goes over, and Kobayashi communicating with them with letters, and Iriru goes over. That section is dramatically expanded. It's very short in the manga. And then when Kanna goes to the other world and Kobayashi follows her, that section also is hugely expanded. And so they've taken this kind of seed of a dramatic story from the manga, but built it out into this full big 3-act structure, or Kisho Tenketsu, whichever structure you want to analyze the movie with. It's got all those pieces, all of those elements. It fits it into a much more classical narrative structure, but the talents of Ishihara Tatsuya and his team here at KyoAni means that I think it works really well to shift everything into that mode and to walk away from, in many ways, the tone and style of the TV show, partially because it fits the fact that we are going to a different character that this is about. It's about Kanna. It's not about Kobayashi and Toru. They are the focal point of the TV show. They are very much, that relationship is not focused on almost at all in this film. And so us moving to Kanna, I think, makes that genre shift kind of easier to accept. I think the big stakes that get involved of this is about, will Kanna go back or to the world where she comes from, or will she choose to stay here, is much bigger stakes than anything other than the finale of season 1 really deals with in the TV show, or a little bit the premiere of season 2 with Iriru and her story arc. And that stuff's, I don't think, done particularly well in season 2. So all these different elements are shifting narratively in terms of character, in terms of point of view, that I think really kind of elegantly moves our perspective and framework from the world of the TV show into the world of this movie. And it's why I think the whole opening sequence of having a kind of mini episode of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid that you get introduced to the movie with, and you've got the opening animation sequence, and all of that is very dramatically disrupted by the appearance of Kimun Kamui. It's a very smart way to bring us into this different valence of this whole franchise that allows this movie to work and work really well.
Yes, and I think the movie is also very careful to make sure, I do think the people who made this, like Ishihara and everyone else, are aware that the lore of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid is complete gobbledygook, and if you just give us lore, my eyes will glaze over. And there are parts of the TV show where that happens, and I'm like, And I think this movie is very careful to understand that you have to root it in something, that Kimun Kamui can't just be a big dragon dude. He has to be Kanna's father, and there's a specific break between them that is not related to dragon lore. It is related to who they are as people, and obviously that is related to how Kimun Kamui was brought up, and I guess that's tangential to the dragon lore, but it's an emotional hook to pour things on, right? Or with Azad, or Azard, however you want to say it, and his whole scheme, which gets the most into the granular dragon lore, because he's trying to pit these two factions against each other and start a war and all this stuff. And I can't really tell you what that's all about, because I don't really care. What I do care about is that Azard has a character motivation for that is perpendicular to what Kanna is going through and what Kobayashi is experiencing as Kanna's surrogate mother/friend. And so that gives you an emotional hook to lay things on. And then when it comes to the dragons are fighting and all of that stuff, again, I don't really know who these characters are, and I don't really care about the lore side of it, but you can give some really, really fucking cool action that is absolutely spectacular, out of this world. That's really awesome. And you can even scaffold that higher and have stuff like the final blow of the movie where Miss Kobayashi does the Genki Dama and defeats Kimun Kamui, make it this massive, expressionistic, outpouring of what the character is feeling in that moment. So it isn't just cool action, it is also deeply tied into who the character is. And I think that scaffolding of lore is the absolute bottom rung, and we're building all the important stuff on top of that. And I think that is something this movie is good at throughout, so that, because there are moments where I can feel if it would start to pull my attention away, I'm like, I don't care about the dragon lore, but then like there would be a real emotional hook to it. You know, Naganama Maria, who plays Kanna, is so good at selling the emotions of this character that just her voice alone draws you in, and then it's very entertaining and all of that. And so yeah, I think this movie structurally, as you said, it's very much, you could put it into Hollywood 3-act structure. I think it probably fits better into the Kisho Tenketsu because it has a pretty long, if you were to say like the 3-act, it's a pretty long first act, but that fits better in a Kisho Tenketsu kind of thing. And it builds to a very satisfying conclusion where, even having enjoyed the movie up through the end, the moment where Kanna jumps into Kimun Kamui's arms and cries, yeah, I didn't expect to be hit as hard at it as I was, and I understand why in Japan there would have been a lot of like cultural conversation about coming out of this movie crying, because yeah, it's that kind of movie.
Absolutely. And I do think it's just like Ishihara, I think, just very elegantly adjusts all these elements from what the series was to bring it into this more familiar world, to build these like metaphors solidly around human style relationships, about like, what is it to be a parent? What is it to be a surrogate parent, right? What is it to be a like role model for someone that you are a sort of parent figure for, but having to understand that you are not their parent, that you are someone that is there to help them and you can serve this role. But like Kanna has too much of a long pre-existing relationship with her father for Kobayashi to just be her dad, or like her like pseudo dad, right? There's like a much more complicated relationship there. And this idea of like, you know, just like all these things of what is it to try to exist with people and live with people and build these relationships when they have different perspectives, different values, when they've been brought up differently than you are. And we have Kobayashi, who finds ways to do that, who believes that we can build those kinds of connections. And then you have Azard, who is, you know, someone, because of the degree to which he has been hurt, refuses to believe that those kinds of relationships can be built, is trying to just kind of revel in the violence and the hatred and play off of that. And I think that's just like, it's a very like relatable, very effective story that is told that is much more on human terms. And I think it works really effectively. I mean, I think like the way the movie builds to this really rousing climax where you have that reunion between Kanna and Kimun Kamui, and then you also have Azard having to confront the fact that like his pain and his suffering is not an excuse to cause suffering for other people, that he has to kind of like, you know, go back and learn from this example that he's seen with Kobayashi and Toru, and kind of reevaluate himself in the world. Like, I think that dual climax is just really, really powerful. And it lands so hard. And it's the kind of thing that Ishihara Tatsuya is just really fucking good at. He's really, really good at this like tight structure, building up to this kind of explosion of emotion and this big kind of bombastic climax that brings all the emotions of this kind of central metaphor, central relationship to the front. You know, whether this is like the big concerts in Sound Euphonium, or it's the big fantasy battles in Love, Chinibyo and Other Delusions, you know, or it's Kyon's imaginary version of himself stomping on his own head in the classroom and shouting at himself. Like, these kinds of really, really potent emotional climaxes that bring the relationship dynamics into such clear focus that you're just like swept up in it. I just think it's like one of the kind of hallmarks of how he tells stories, and it's why the movies can be particularly effective, because it's like such a focused version of that. And yeah, like it is so elegant, I think, the way that all those pieces come together. Because I think I had a similar thing to you of like around the midpoint of the movie, I was still very much enjoying it, but I was starting to like drift a little bit away from it. And then like some of the action stuff would bring you back in and bring you back in. I kind of drift away. And then when it all comes to the ending, it's like how every single element ties into that so perfectly. It's just like, fuck yeah, it's so good. And yes, I'm not someone who usually, like, my emotional reaction to movies is not crying, but like I felt that like big gut punch when Kanna jumps into Kimun Kamui's arms, and then a different kind of reaction of seeing Azard have to like stick away in the grass afterwards, trying to get away. Both pieces of that I think are just very, very effective.
Absolutely. And again, comparing this to the TV show, you know, I think that first season is just, it's a near perfect season of TV. Takemoto, it's I was listening to our podcast about it again, Sean, and you said like it's about as good a expression of his way to balance tone and the kinds of things he was interested in as he did in his life. And it's very true. It's just a great show. And that second season is still good TV. It's fun. It's easy to recommend, but it is more scattershot in a lot of different ways. Like there are things that play to Ishihara's strengths. There's things that feel like they're kind of vestigial, like some of the Alulu stuff, right? But this movie, even though I would still say season 1 is my favorite Kobayashi thing, this film just plays very heavily to Ishihara's strengths, as you said, and so it means that it is artistically a much more unified thing. And I just want to also give kudos to his storyboarding again and talk about some of that, because I think one of the smartest things he does here is he gives the two halves of the movie very distinct visual identities. So the first half, when you are in Japan, and it's the daily life stuff, and then it is when the daily life stuff gets interrupted. Obviously, the movie doesn't shift totally until we get into the Dragon World. But that daily life stuff, both before and after Kimun Kamui arrives, is actually storyboarded pretty differently than the TV show, like those equivalent segments. Like, it looks much more like Clannad or Haruhi in the way he does, like, there's scenes where they go to a cafe, and there's a lot of shots of everyone's legs at a canted angle under the table, or cutting away to a clock on the wall, or watching a glass of iced tea with condensation dripping down the side. All those things that like Yamada Naoko took and made like core to her visual identity as a storyboarder. The stuff like I think she kind of got from Ishihara of how you depict kind of off-kilter daily life and how you can show emotions kind of pouring over into the environment, even if you don't show the characters reacting much, like that kind of thing, where a lot of how Kobayashi is having very mixed emotions about what's going on with Kanna and her father in that first half of the movie are through these kind of off-kilter environmental shots that are so good, so sensory, so powerful. And then that second half, it cuts loose, and this is like the fantasy action sequences from Love, Shinibi and Other Delusions, or it is like all of the big action in Myriad Colors Phantom World, but all kind of dialed up further. Like this movie is the closest KyoAni has come to the joke of KyoAni should just make a shonen anime, because the second half of this is like a Dragon Ball movie, but with ridiculous dragons and an office worker who likes to drink beer a lot, right? Like that's what this second half of this movie is, and that also plays very heavily into his strengths, but it is two very different versions of that I think he's very careful to distinguish between in the overall like visual language of the film, and I think that is part of what makes it as effective as it is also.
Yeah, I like that breakdown, because in that first half, if we're looking at this in the Kisho Tenketsu structure, that first half of all the stuff in the world before Kobayashi goes through the dimensional gate is all the Kisho, right? Like the show section starts when Kimun Kamui shows up. And so that whole piece, I do like that you're identifying that. It's like, it's not just him doing, like, we have an episode of the show that then gets interrupted by Kimun Kamui. You are right that it is more like it's trying to be an episode of the show and it can't, because the first thing that happens in the movie is Kanna has a dream about her father and being cradled in her father's arms. And so there's like immediately this sense of like, we want to have that kind of comfortable status quo from the end of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S, where you have Ilalus living with them now, and everyone's just kind of like in their little regular relationships doing the regular stuff, but everything's a little bit off, that everything's a little bit strained. And you have that piece with Kanna. You also have Lukua, who is like she's kind of like out of sorts a little bit, and she's not with Shota, and there's like that sense of Lukua is this like a literal god, and so I do think there's a sense of she is, in her way of trying to be removed from the situation, there's this sense of like something is on the horizon, that these relationships, the status quo, isn't actually manageable, because there is something underneath it that needs to be addressed. And that also then comes into focus with the central metaphor of the movie, which is the cuckoo bird thing, which is, in that early scene of Kanna and Ilalu watching the documentary about cuckoo birds, and the whole thing of, them being laid in another species bird's nest, and then they kick those eggs out, and then the mama bird of the original eggs comes in and doesn't know the difference and just keeps feeding that cuckoo bird food and making it get bigger and stronger. And then that metaphor is revisited at the end of the movie in the post-credit scene, where they bring it into a fact that I actually probably should look up. I just accept that it's true because the movie said it. It might not be true. I have no idea. But that the cuckoo bird then will go lay its own eggs in the nest of a species that's the same species as the one that it was raised by. As this kind of way to kind of bring it back around to that at the end, even with these kinds of weird, disruptive, like pseudo-parasitic relationships in nature, that there is still some kind of like familial bond or something that underpins that. Whether or not it's really true in nature is outside the point, even if that is an animal not fact. It still is a very effective metaphor for what the movie is doing. But because that cuckoo bird metaphor is appropriate for the movie, but it's also very disturbing because it's very fucked up. That you have this like giant weird bird that's totally out of proportion with its so-called parent, and it has like basically murdered the unborn children that parent was going to have. There's something just like inherently disturbing and unsettling about that I think does underpin this sort of like odd thing that's going on here. You also just have all the stuff of like, KyoAni and Ishihara Tatsuya in particular are just the best at making summer feel very hot and very humid. And, there's, yes, like everything they do has big summer arcs and all that kind of stuff. I mean, this is the Endless Eight. That is, how do we get 8 different directors to depict how hot and oppressive summer can be, is like one of the projects of that whole thing. And that's another piece here, is you just get that oppressive heat of summer and how well that's expressed well before Kimun Kamui shows up. So that when Kimun Kamui is there, you do have this sense of something is off, something has to happen, beyond the fact that you obviously know that because you're watching a movie and you know that eventually the plot's going to have to kick into gear. But there's just an underlying dread that informs that when Kimun Kamui is there, you have a very, very potent example of dramatic irony where the audience is keenly aware at this point that dude is bad fucking news, that he is going to, that this is the thing we have been dreading has shown up. And Kobayashi, in her ignorance, does not know that, and so she's sitting there having sake with this guy. And the very fun, but also unsettling sequence of them being like, "Okay, bye," and then they're both walking the same direction. Like, "Oh, weird. I guess we're walking the same way." It's like, "Oh, weird. I guess we're going to the same apartment complex. Oh, weird. I guess we're getting off on the same floor. Oh, weird. Oh, this is my apartment." Yes. Like that whole sequence is so good. And that's where everything really kicks off. But yeah, like Ishihara is so effective in that opening sequence, giving you the sense of we want to have our fun Kobayashi, antics. You've got, that whole adorable piece of Kanna and her friends going to the fucking payphone and have this like rumor about like aliens will like abduct you if you pick up the phone, and they're calling the fucking Weather Channel like it's the 1970s or some shit. But Kanna is like a little bit off and she's a little bit removed from it. You've got that sensation. And then when Kimun Kamui shows up, it's like, oh, all of this is gone. He literally explodes Kobayashi's apartment that Toru is able to physically repair, but the like underlying damage to the relationships is not something that magic just can like, pave over. And that whole opening to the movie is just so good at getting you into what this movie is trying to explore.
No, totally. And I was very compelled through all of it, even as, once Kimun Kamui shows up, the jokes don't go away completely, but they dry up a little bit, right? Like, yes. And it becomes less of the focus. Comedy becomes more incidental than the center of things. But I think all of the things you're describing there, Sean, and the fact that it's creating this emotional, like, layer for us to understand of everything, so that when you go into the dragon world and everything becomes much more of a kind of like visual expression of those emotions, that contrast can become more deeply felt.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you can have your giant crazy Top Gun scene and your spirit bombs and what have you. And yes, there are these big like sort of emotive expressions of this like very kind of repressed feeling you get in that first half of the movie, where all the stuff is under the surface being picked at but can't be fully let loose.
Yes. And I think, the way they handle the shift sort of it's not a shift in protagonist. Kobayashi is still our protagonist in our POV, basically. But Kanna is now the focus of her attention and therefore ours. And I think that is handled well because it's not like Kobayashi and Toru disappear from this movie at all. It just takes it sort of as a given that, okay, Kobayashi and Toru are tight. They are who they are. We don't need to focus on that here. Maybe there's more stories to tell between them in the future, but in this movie, they get each other. There's like no friction between them in this movie. They're pretty simpatico at this point, which I think feels right. And so Toru is kind of like the sidekick character who just gets shit done. Toru in this movie just is like Superman or Goku or something. She shows up and she can solve the problem pretty easily because she's a very powerful dragon. And so the problems are more like, okay, Kobayashi's attention is not on Toru this time around, it is on that Kanna relationship. And that is another thing I did like about this in comparison to the TV show, is just seeing a concentrated 90-minute story that is furthering Kobayashi's character development, but not through Toru, who is basically at the center of all of that in both seasons of the TV show, or at least the best parts of it. And here you have it a very different thing, because Toru is more of a partner in whatever way you want to use that word, right? Like Toru is Kobayashi's life partner in one way or another. Kanna is not. Kanna plays basically a child role, although Kanna is not literally a child in all sorts of ways, but it's close enough, right? And that is interesting, and I like how that's played. And you do kind of get the feeling of Kobayashi and Toru as mom and dad in this a little bit, or mom and mom, I guess we should say. Mom and dragon, however you want to call it. And yeah, I like that switch, and I like how they're able to, because Kobayashi is such a rich character, as like weird as she is, how unfazed she is by everything. I love how she's getting into learning magic in this movie, but then also when she learns that how she's going to make the spirit bomb is by doing the Full Metal Alchemist, I forget how I use magic now, right? Like that kind of thing from like the end of FMA. But she doesn't care. She's like, oh yeah, I don't need to do magic anymore. I'm just going to make the spirit bomb. She's such a compelling character in those idiosyncrasies, and I liked getting a different valence on her here.
Yes, because because obviously, like, her, in many ways, her defining character trait has always been nonchalance, right? Nothing phases her. She is the office lady who fucking got drunk, missed her stop on the train, climbed up a goddamn mountain, drinking a bottle of sake, ended up discovering a dragon with a giant holy sword sticking out of it, and just was like, oh, whatever, pulled the sword out and had drinks with the dragon, right? And then when the dragon shows up the next day, there's lots of antics, but she does ultimately let it live with her. She's someone that just can't really be fazed by things. Or if she is phased, she is able to like deal with that and move beyond it very effectively. And so yes, I do love all the stuff of her very casually learning how to use magic in the background. It's not commented all that much upon, and then the big reveal at the end that like she's able to make the big spirit bomb by just being like, oh, I'm going to use up all of the magic inside of my body, and that's the thing that Azar cannot comprehend, because his whole he needs this sense of like power in order for him to live, in order for him to like feel like he has control over himself in his life, and what that has done to him, even though the only thing he's using that power for is hurting other people, whereas Kobayashi is able to build relationships and have a life without having those powers because of the different approach she's had, and also like just like the nature of where she lived and stuff has given her that opportunity that Azar didn't necessarily have. But his anger and his suffering and his pain means he's blind to like the notion of giving up power is just so alien to him. He can't even comprehend it. And Kobayashi's like, yeah, whatever. I don't need magic spells to fucking make an Excel spreadsheet, okay? Like, yeah. It's not part of my life. I don't need it. Like, it would be cool, sure, but I'm fine. And that is a very fun resolution that she doesn't go on a big character arc towards that revelation. It is just our perspective as the audience. We don't really know what she's doing or what this weird secret, the fucking president of the company she works at, who's also an ancient wizard, which is always a fun, weird detail the show never goes all that much into. But he tells her about the secret, but we obviously cut away before we find it. And it's not her struggling over this decision. It is an obvious natural decision for her. And it's just revealed at the end what that decision has always been.
But then I also love how the film contrasts, that level of nonchalance with the sheer exertion she is willing to go through for the people she cares about, right?
Yes.
And that is what that final scene is about. And I think my favorite little visual detail in this movie is that when she fires off the crane, when Toru just chucks her up into the sky, which is so funny, because Kobayashi doesn't need to be chucked up into the sky for this, but Toru decides to, make her Goku in this moment, and it's great. So she's chucked up into the sky, and when she fires the bomb, the dragon orb, in the storyboards and the execution, you have it repeat 3 times. It's the big, a lot of anime do this. The moment I think of, because I like to show this moment to my students when I'm describing some editing techniques, is in Police Story when Jackie Chan does the big stunt at the end where he rappels down that whole thing, and they just show it 3 times. So they just do the blast 3 times, and it is this big emphasis for us of everything Kobayashi cares about being poured into this. What that scene is actually saying is not she has the most power and so she wins. It's that she is imparting onto Kimun Kamui some amount of the care it is possible for her to have for Kanna, despite there being no blood relation. And this kind of shakes Kimun Kamui out of into the sense of that he can also express some of that to Kanna, I think is how you could say it, right? That is what emotionally is going on in that scene. And so I think doing the 3 blasts repeated, breaking the continuity and doing it that way is part of it. And then in the following scene, when Kanna finally jumps into Kimun Kamui's arms and we have the big swell, they show that 3 times. They show her jump, jump, break the continuity. And connecting those 2 moments visually with that repeated action is, I think most people won't even notice that echo exists in the style of the film, but you will notice it subliminally. It gets through to you on the level of that crazy exertion that you see Kobayashi give is in some way one and the same with Kanna making that leap into this parental relationship she's never had. But she has had it through Kobayashi. And I think that is Ishihara being a very, very smart director.
Yeah, and it's absolutely that synergy between those 2 moments is very potent. And it's also something where I think it expresses how it's something that Kanna has needed to learn in her growth and her emotional development has been the way she's dealt with this relationship and this desire she's had for this relationship with her father has always been one of her making light suggestions and then kind of running away, right? And the whole impetus of her in ending up in the series in the first place, that is revealed for the first time here of what it was. But when she's introduced with the context of she played a prank on her parents because she was lonely and wanted them to pay attention to her. And that's how she has ended up in this world, is that she was kind of banished for the prank she played. And there's, I think, a little bit of a retcon that it was always strongly implied that the mom was involved in that as well. And there's just kind of, the mom is just sort of absent at this point, which, I don't particularly give a shit about that. But it is how we understand this character and how she's introduced to us. But it's always interesting that she's introduced as she is a prankster is the line that Toru gives when she introduced Kanna. But Kanna's never a real prankster in the show. There's a couple of little tiny moments, but it's not how you define the character. And so I do like the way you get this contextualized in all of this relationship is that's not inherent to who she is as a person, but she doesn't know, in the same way that Kimun Kamui doesn't know how to express anything for his daughter other than her practical usage in the grand war between the Chaos and Harmony faction and all that shit. He sees her as a tool, an extension of himself and his own power and influence. But deep down, and I think you see in this movie, deep down there is something there. He does have some affection for his daughter, and he just has absolutely no idea what that is or how to express it. I think Kanna has a similar kind of thing where she doesn't know how to convey these feelings to her dad. The most she has done is you have this very touching little moment in the early movie where she has that flashback of her in her dragon form, feeling really cold, seeing a human family huddled together, and she goes and she jumps onto her dad's back and feels that warmth. And that moment is revisited at the end of the movie, recontextualized as Kimun Kamui felt that warmth as well, even if he couldn't show it. But here, Kanna now being I'm not going to jump onto your back, sort of secretly to try to sort of pull some of that warmth. I'm going to run right in front of you. I'm going to shout. I'm going to jump into your arms 3 times in the edit. and shout in your face like I was lonely in tears, right? And she learns how to express it as well. And so it's not just like Kim and Kamui, him having to learn to discover those feelings and how to express them. It's about Kanna showing what she's learned through her relationship with Kobayashi, which is that you have to be direct with these things. You have to be open with these things. She can't expect her relationship with her father to change if she's not going to try to also express what it is that she's feeling.
Sean, you mentioned earlier the Kisho Tenketsu structure, and for those who don't know what that is, it's basically like it's not just Japan. It's sort of Greater East Asia uses this, but it's sort of a different version of what we might think of as like 3-act structure here. And in the Kisho Tenketsu, the ketsu, the last word in Japanese, literally means like to tie together. And this movie is such a good example of that concept of like the end of your story, the denouement, the climax has to be something that ties all the things of the movie together, both what was the starting point, what was the twist that threw us off, that is the ten, right? And so the ketsu tying it together, it does that so well through the 2 moments we're talking about and that cumulative impact of that jump Kanna makes, and paying off the TV series, the whole arc of the film, all of that stuff. And it is, I think it took both of us aback by how good that moment is, because there isn't an equivalent moment like that in the Kobayashi TV series. The TV series is, it's often very emotionally affecting. I don't want to say that it's like detached and at a remove, because that's not true either. But it doesn't have like the grand melodrama in the same way. And I do not use melodrama there pejoratively. This is a very different kind of emotional moment, and it is earned and executed very well here.
Yeah, I mean, the TV show, even though it does feature dragons, it is in what you would call the daily life or slice of life genre. Like it still is one of those, because that's where we're at with that genre, is so codified and has developed so much that you can have a daily life show where half the cast are magical dragons from a parallel dimension, and you can still call it a slice of life daily life show, because there are more. Yes. Even more off, like, key, like, weird-ass daily show or daily life shows out there, even beyond that. And so, yes, the drama within the TV show always has to exist within that framework of it is fundamentally about a person who is, spending their life going to work at a kind of dead-end job, coming home, like, late at night, like, absolutely exhausted, and finding some kind of relaxation, the Japanese word iyashi that is kind of attached to this genre, this kind of salve almost, in these relationships he's able to build. It just so happens his relationships are with dragons. And so the most melodrama or anything that approaches that, at least in the original show, is the climactic arc where it's about Kobayashi having to face a life where Toru might not be there because her father, the Emperor of Demise, takes her back. But until that, Kobayashi then realizes how much she has needed that relationship the whole time to bring color to her life, and so she needs Toru back, right? That's like how the original show, that's the like modulation it goes for. Whereas here it is so much bigger. It's so much more explosive, often quite literally explosive. But that just works so well for it being the scale of a movie. It's the thing that makes it feel like this isn't, a 5-episode arc for season 3 of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. No, this is the movie for Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. It needs to go to this much bigger place for it to think, like, justify the cinematic format it's going for.
Yeah, and I think it does that well. It definitely took me aback because it just, again, not the movie I was expecting, but I like going into a theater and getting a movie different than what I expected, and I enjoyed this quite a bit. And I could feel in the theater, like, there were people afterwards kind of talking, like, surprised by what it was, and the people I went with were also kind of surprised, but in a good way. I think we all enjoyed it. Absolutely. And I just want to go back again to just, I know we said it earlier, but how good, I think the 2 main actors in this movie to praise are Naganawa Maria as Kanna, who is, it is like the most weapons-grade adorable performance in anime history. It's just ludicrous. But like, when that character is introduced in season 1, the level of adorability is a joke, right? Like it's funny that she is this ludicrously adorable. And here, to modulate that into completely sincere emotionality by the end of this film just speaks to the talent of the performer. And then again, Tatsuki Fumihiko, so great. The way that, like, I think it's in the animation, but it is also so key to the voice that I think you understand from the moment he appears that something else is in there. He is not as devoid of emotionality as he claims to be. He is unaware of it. He is not consciously lying to anyone when he says these things, but we can hear there's a little more there, which you wouldn't say about Ikari Gendo. He is just a piece of shit. Exactly. But maybe you could speak of the modulation maybe Gendo gets in, like, the rebuild of Eva movies. I don't know. But, like, it is a very, very solid performance that I think understands where the character has to go long before he gets there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I definitely want to echo what you're saying for both of them, but particularly for Naganawa Madia as Kanna. I think one thing that's just, like, really impressive is this, you know, this movie asks her to go to a much more extreme emotional place that character's ever gone to, because part of the whole thing with her is there's this kind of, like, low-key, very kind of, like, mellow quality to the performance. It's what in Japanese you'd call her a downer is how it's often referred to, but it's that, like, kind of, she doesn't, like, have big emotions. Even when she expresses, like, frustration and stuff like that, vocally, she doesn't waver a lot from the same vocal place. And you see it in this movie in one of, like, the most adorable moments, which is when she's asking for a smartphone from Kobayashi.
Yes.
And Kobayashi's like, I don't know, I think it's a little early. And she throws a fit. But if you, like, listen to the voice when she's throwing the fit, like, she's very animated and she's saying how frustrated she is, but she's still in a very narrow vocal range in her voice. That, again, has this kind of very mellow tone. So that way, when the punchline of that is that when Kobayashi doesn't give in, she just goes, ake nameta, like, I give up. And she just moves on.
Yes.
This is what helps that punch land really well. But in the second half of this movie, in particular, when she's pushed to these, like, emotional extremes, one, when she is, like, a part of a whole crazy big action moment with Azard, where you have the crazy 3D camera where she's fucking zooming around with, like, lightning and shit. You know, like, she's into a much more, like, extreme place in the voice there. And then that whole kind of very mellow affectation the character has totally breaks down in the final moment of the movie when she leaps into Kimi Kamui's arms and screams out, I was lonely, I was just so lonely. It's something that makes that moment hit so hard, is I think you feel how much part of that vocal affectation in the character that Naganawa Madia has honed to, like, a nuclear weapons level of effectiveness over the course of the TV show, that is an affectation on the part of Kanna as a character. That it is like, she has always been the lonely dragon of the title. Her being the lonely dragon is not a thing that started in this movie. It's just this movie is where that has built up to a boiling point. But she's always been, through her relationships with characters like Kobayashi and Saikawa, trying to fill this hole that her parents can't fill for her. That's always been part of the character. And I just think there's something about there's something very satisfying narratively about arriving at a point with this character where you see that affectation, that facade break down, and this very, like, brutally sincere version of the character shines through, of the things that she's really been feeling the whole time that she's never quite been able to express. And it's one of the things that makes it, like, such a worthwhile movie as a fan of the series, beyond it just being a very good movie. But if you like the show and you like the characters, I think, like, the big takeaway is that you do get this, like, much bigger view and much bigger understanding and much bigger exploration of Kanna as a character. And she's always been the, like, standout character from the TV show. She's, like, the most kind of eccentric, most interesting, most kind of, like, flashy is a weird word to use, but she's in some ways the most charismatic character because of how almost iconic she is in her insane adorableness. I mean, that's always been the case with the character since the show originally came out. She was, like, the breakout character that people were, like, very focused on and would post memes about her online and stuff like that. And so there has always been, with just the TV show, a sense that character has never really got her full story told. And so it is hugely satisfying to finally get that in a way that I just never expected. You know, I didn't think that they were going to do any more Ms. Kobayashi's Dragon Maid for various reasons. But it was, like, so cool to get the movie and be like, yes, we finally get that part of this character's story fully told on screen.
Totally. And just going back to, because you mentioned that early in what you just said, but the smartphone little mini arc that happens in this, the subplot in this movie.
Yes.
I just want to say the Japanese word for smartphone, smaho, is one of the greatest linguistic inventions of the Japanese language, because it is one of those words that Japanese voice actors can wrap their mouths around in the funniest way. Right? Like, I'm not imagining this. Like, there's something about how both Naganawa Maria and Tamaro Mutsumi, who plays Kobayashi, the way they say smaho in this movie, and they're like looking about it and all that, it is one of those words I find so fucking delightful. We need a word like that. Like, either it doesn't work in English the same way, but like, we need to have more adorable words for these everyday objects, because smaho it's great.
Yeah, it's definitely like one of the all-time great Japanese abbreviations of a word. I'm
Yes.
with you. It's smartphone turned into smaho. Yes, and I do love that it seems like it's like a small little character detail, but I do like that it is the sort of like Chekhov's smartphone.
Yes.
That it is the thing
with the vocal recorder she gets for her birthday, which is cute too. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that whole dynamic. And I do love that it's like one of the most kind of cliche things you can do is the whole like, we're going to get the bad guy to say his evil plan out loud, but we'll have secretly recorded it. That's just like one of the most ancient movie tropes ever, and TV show tropes that has been, like evolved in so many ways of like, but I was recording the fact that you were recording. It proves your recording is not the record. And, like you have all that kind of shit. It almost could be like an Austin Powers gag. But I love that here there is something about it that's very fresh, that it's Azar's reaction that just like really sells it to me as being like, oh, it's not just the cliche. There's something so fun about her, one, that it's not just her playing the fucking recording, it's that the recording is being transmitted to all the dragons via magic. But it's also Azar looking at this sort of like little kid smartphone and the little tiny recorder thing or whatever, and just being like, what the fuck is that shit? like what? Like is that some sort of like ancient communication device? I just love like the weird mage dude who can fight dragons and has fucking Excalibur and all this shit, just looking at like a retro recorder and just being like, what sorcery is this nonsense? There's something about the way that Nobunaga plays that moment, because the character's so wrapped up in his scheme and all this shit, and he's just chewing the scenery like a motherfucker. And then the fact that it's just a guy for whom the concept of this kind of technology is just totally alien makes that whole trope about the recording thing just, I don't know, it made it very fresh and kind of funny for me. And I just really like the way that Nobunaga plays that moment as Azard.
Yes, very much so. And just like the ridiculousness of one of the first big spells Kobayashi ever uses is creating like a 5G data network in the dragon world. It's fucking great. That's just a great gag. And so it's doing the I recorded you and I'm revealing your evil plan in the most unexpected setting, which is what makes it work, right? Yeah, and that they have seeded it, but still there's no cell service in the dragon world. But there was a spell for that apparently. Love it. Yes. It's so stupid, but it's so good. Any other like little things you want to mention as we start wrapping up here? I do want to praise Fafnir's role in this movie. Fafnir, obviously a fan favorite. The great, dark dragon who became obsessed with online gaming and going to Kamike and selling his doujin works and stuff. And I love that in this movie, Fafnir does finally get off his ass and do something, but very reluctantly. I love how Ono Daisuke plays that, because Fafnir is like supposed to be like the baddest motherfucker in the dragon world, but mostly he just wants to stay at home and play video games. And I relate to that. He's a very relatable dragon.
Well, it's the like inherent joke with that character has always just been very good about the sort of equating the ancient folklore dragon that lives in the cave guarding its treasure forever as being the same thing as a dude who just is a total shut-in and spends all of his life playing video games and buying like anime figurines. It's an inherently good gag, and it is like, I do think Ono Daisuke just like has so many good one-liners as Fafnir in this movie. It's like, even when the movie's very dramatic, he's the character that got like laughs out of my theater kind of every time he showed up, because he's always got some good one-liner that kind of brings some of that like comedic relief out. because there's something that him, he's just so above all of this shit. He doesn't really care all that much. He cares just enough to help out every once in a while, but really he just wants to go play Dark Souls or whatever. And I do think that is a really fun role that he plays. And I do like, the use of the broader cast. None of them are like big elements in the movie, but I do like Luca, who's not like all that present, but just I like the way the character's used. I like that sense of she just sort of pieces out at some point, and she's just kind of mysteriously not there because she is literally a god. She's Quetzalcoatl. She's part of this like spectator faction or whatever. She's not supposed to intervene, and she just gives that little tiny little help and just sort of adjust the scales slightly. And you have that little moment with her and Toru at the end where Toru says like, I understand now how hard it can be to be that spectator faction, because Toru, it's a nice commentary on Toru's role in the plot of this movie, that she's someone who has always been at the center of the drama of the plot lines in Kobayashi's Maid Dragon. And for this one, it's all about Kobayashi and Kanna and that relationship. And Toru can only be there to help out. But she can't be the one to fix that problem. And there's just like a nice little, it's a clever strategic use of this character Luca from the show without giving like a lot of energy to her or oxygen to her in the movie, because it's a very svelte movie for a show that has a very big cast of memorable characters. That I do think they're smart about giving. Everyone has like a good little moment, and Luca's I'm particularly liked.
Yes, absolutely. Love all of them. I did have a question. So Ilulu is in this a fair bit.
I forgot to Ilulu. I forgot to update it in my notes. Ilulu's original voice actor Tomomi Mineuchi, she is retired at this point, so they did recast her. She is Sugiura Shiori, who she has been in KyoAni stuff before because she's in Sound Euphonium. She's Didika. She's the girl who is the other. What is the instrument? Is it clarinet? I think she's the other clarinet player that's in. Particularly, she's in Liz and the Blue Bird. I'm blanking all the names of those characters, but she's that like new character that Nozomi and Liz and the Blue Bird is kind of like mentoring because she's like a first year or whatever. So she's not been in a lot of stuff, but that's her KyoAni connection. So she's the recast for Iruru. Which I think unless you had like just watched Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S, I don't think you'd ever notice.
I did not catch it, but yeah.
Yeah, because she's such a good sound-alike for the original performance. And Ilu does have like good whole scene in the movie of I like her like sneaking in and encountering Azard and having like this nice little kind of mid-movie action scene that sets up the kind of action we're going to see. Is a very good use of that character.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had Gotoza-sama again in this movie. Smaller part than in City, but it was nice to hear her again.
Yes, and interestingly, because they did use her in this movie, even though her regular role from the show, Georgie, is visibly in the movie, but she doesn't say anything. But the TV announcer in the cuckoo thing is very clearly Goto Yuko. And so I was like, yes, I'm glad that it makes sense that Georgie, the maid at the Saikawa house, that's like the quote-unquote maid, that there's no spot for her in this movie as like a notable character, but I like that they're like, well, we everybody else is in the movie, even Nakamura Yuichi, who is character Takia, is only in like one scene. So they got everybody in the movie, but it's like, well, this character doesn't really have a speaking role. Well, we have another role. We can get Goto Yuko in there. She can be the TV announcer.
Yes, it's great. And yes, I did love that Nakamura Yuichi showed up for his like 5 lines in this movie, but hey,
yes.
KyoAni calls, he comes. He's always there.
Yes, absolutely. It is very fun where on their YouTube channel, they did all these videos. It was like one video a day for like a week or two right after the movie premiered, with different members of the cast at the movie theater giving like a 1 minute comment on the movie and being like, and the movie's in theaters now. It's just like a little promotional video. And they did one with its own Daisuke and Nakamura Yuichi, but most of this is just making fun of the fact that Nakamura Yuichi's barely in the movie. It's a very good little 1 minute bit that they have.
That's awesome. Anything else to say about the film itself before we move on?
I just briefly shout out what I've in my notes repeatedly referred to as the Dragon Top Gun scene, because that scene is fucking awesome. Like it is for me, that is like the standout action scene in that kind of classic action movie way of where it's really that kind of like late second act scene action scene is actually the best one and not the climactic one, because that has too much other stuff other than action to deal with. But I think that as your shit has gotten real, Kobayashi's in the dragon world now, but they've been separated, and now Todo has to have an extended fucking jet fighter sequence with a bunch of other dragons. It's just a really unique action scene, but it's so good. Like you could totally just take that storyboarding and put it into a modern military story and have them be literal fighter jets, or have it be like a Macross action scene or some shit, and it would fit perfectly. Like the way she's like in the clouds and the other dragons like, where's she gone? Where is she? You know, the only thing it's missing, because they're all dragons, is you don't have the pilot cut-ins like in Gundam, where you have like their cutaway and they have their face overlaid on it. Then you have Todo comes in and she's flying from like with the sun at her back, and the Kobayashi Sachiko character is like totally surprised and gets shot by her. Like, it's just such a good airplane action scene that just happens to have them not be airplanes. They're all big anime dragons. It's just one, that scene is not in the manga at all. That is a total fabrication for this movie. They totally made it up. I just assume Ishihara Tatsuya was like, we need a sick ass, I want to do a sick ass jet scene. I saw Top Gun Maverick a couple of years ago, and I want to do one of those. And it's just really fucking good.
It's so right, and I'm glad you highlighted it, because it is, as you say, very fucking good. My other question is, so there is a bunch more manga. This show is perpetually popular each time. The two seasons, this movie, like, it's not the kind of like earth-shattering hit, but it does really well for them. Do you think this is something they'll come back to? Like, it does feel like the kind of thing that, especially after this movie, if Ishihara wanted to pass it on to a younger member of the staff, I could see this being a kind of show that might be a good transition point for someone. I don't know. Like, I don't feel like I need more, but I also didn't feel like I needed more at the end of season 1 or season 2, and it keeps being good. So I'm curious if you think this is like the end for them. They did a movie like they've done with a lot of other stuff, and now they're done. Or do you feel like maybe there's more to do here?
Yeah, my gut reaction is I would guess that this is probably the end. I mean, again, I was very surprised when they announced that they were making this movie, because I just did not think that they were going to do more with the series. I mean, obviously, if they wanted to, I mean, they literally haven't even done half of the manga yet, and the manga is ongoing. So there is a lot of material. I have no idea what happens in the manga. I assume, I think probably the deciding factor of that would be, more than anything else, is how interesting is where the manga goes, and is that something that really has caught Ishihara Tatsuya's attention? Because that's obviously, you know, the reality at KyoAni is that they make the projects that they want to make. They have spent a lot of time, and we recorded that in our Kyoto vacation, on how they went through this process to build the studio and design the studio in such a way that they could do whatever projects they wanted to, and have a lot of creative control, if not total creative control, over those projects. So I think it's very much, if Ishihara Tatsuya is interested in where the manga goes and wants to tell more of that story, I think it's totally possible they do more. But my gut feeling would be probably not, because I don't think there's any world where they would do all of the manga in the way that they were able to do all of Sound Euphonium, because the source material was not that long that you could cover it in 3 anime seasons plus a movie. I don't think there's any world where they would have 5 to 6 seasons of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. And so I think they have to pick a stopping point. And this is, if they don't do more, this is a fucking great stopping point. Like, this would be like a very fun, in a couple of years, do a rewatch where I watch season 1, season 2, and the movie. And I think I would feel very satisfied with that experience, because again, Kanna is the central character introduced very early in season 1, who has this lingering plot situation hanging over the character's head that never gets resolved by the TV show, that gets resolved by this movie. And the movie has such a resounding finality to it. They haven't opened up anything with Kobayashi and Toru's relationship in the movie, that's still at kind of like where it was in the TV show, that I think if they leave it here, it would be a great conclusion to the animated version of this story.
Right. And I think, I think it's a question worth considering, so I'm glad we brought it up.
Yeah.
But I think I basically agree with you, because one, this is very common, like especially for Ishihara's works. The 2 seasons plus a movie thing that is Haruhi, that is Chunibyo and Other Delusions, that is now this. He's done this several times, right? That's KON, which is Yamada Naoko, but that is also 2 seasons movie. And so this is a pretty common thing to do, and it feels like probably the right point. But I'm just curious, because they could do more, but also there being more original material out there has literally never stopped KyoAni, even for their most successful shows like Haruhi. If they feel like they fully articulated what they wanted to fully articulate, even if there was easy money to be made, they generally just move on, and that's one of the things we love about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I would absolutely be up for more if they wanted to do more, but I don't have like a incredible gnawing desire for we got to get more Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid.
Yes. But speaking of more to come, Sean, we just, as in yesterday, learned about more KyoAni stuff. The Kyotification is never going to end.
Yes, yeah. So we are, wrapping up here, I guess, what is part 8 of our Kyoto vacation this summer, too. Could be that summer. But I just have to assume that the good folks at KyoAni knew that we were going to be doing this recording. So they're like, well, we got to give Japanimation Asia's Kyoto vacation a heads up on what's happening next. Because, yes, yesterday from this recording, Saturday, October 25th, Kyoto Animation had a live stage event where they announced what they were doing next in 2026. And so as we wrap up here, let's give a preview of where Kyoto Vacation will be going next year. And it's somewhere that is maybe a little bit familiar if you have been following along Kyoto Animation stuff. So they announced that their next project in 2026 would be a TV anime called Nijiseki Denki Mokudoku Yurika Everika, or 20th Century Electric Catalog. Yurika Everika would be the literal translation of that title. And on their website, they have given it an official English title that I assume it will use when it comes out, which is Sparks of Tomorrow, which is a fine title. I like 20th Century Electric Catalog. I have no idea what Yurika Everika is. I don't know what that subtitle is supposed to be. But, I'm fine with Sparks of Tomorrow. Now, that title, sans the Yurika Everika, that's a new part, but that original title, 20th Century Electric Catalog, that might sound familiar if you've been following KyoAni stuff for a long time, because this is not a brand new project. It is a revitalization of a project that they announced before the 2019 arson attack. So this is based on a light novel of the same title. Again, sans the Yurika Everika. I feel like that additional part of the title was added on to indicate that they have drifted even further from the source material than they typically have, is my understanding of kind of what's happened there. But that original light novel was written by Yukihiro, and that light novel was the sole winner of the 2017 Kyoto Animation Awards by Kyoto's Animation's publishing arm, KS Mabunko. Just as a recap for people who don't remember, this is how shows like Love Chinibu and Other Delusions, Myriad Colors Phantom World, Violet Evergarden was one of these free. A whole bunch of those shows from the 2010s, most of them were through KyoAni publishing light novels that were submitted for a contest, and then them awarding those light novels as a part of that contest, and the winners would be given anime adaptations or be up for anime adaptations. This was the last one of those. So it was announced at that time in 2017 that it had been selected for anime adaptation like those previous winners, but obviously the 2019 arson attack happened. That whole project got derailed. We don't know what the major staff were that were involved with it, but nothing had been heard about it since the attack happened. This is, though, a totally new approach. This is clearly not a simple continuation of what that old adaptation was. This is clearly like a full reset. Again, that's what I think the implication of that subtitle Yurika Everika is, because they have turned it into like a steampunk setting and stuff like that, which was not a part of the original thing. It's set in the early 20th century at the near the end of the Meiji era, but it's like now it's a kind of like almost steampunk version of that if you watch the trailer. One other way we know that this is clearly a new approach is that, very excitingly, this show, the 2 announced KyoAni credits for the show are from relative newcomers, at least in terms of at this level of production. So they have announced that the director for the show is Ota Minoru. Just a recap on him, we've talked about him before because he is an up-and-comer through the 2010s. So he started at KyoAni as an animator in the early 2010s. But he started to move up into more prominence in 2017 and 18, where on Violet Evergarden, he was given a very particular credit of accessory setting, which he got alongside the very renowned animator at KyoAni, animation director, Takahashi Hiroyuki, who we talked about mostly in the role of he was the music instrument director for Sound Euphonium. And so this accessory setting role is obviously a similar thing of all these sort of rigid objects like Violet's arms and stuff like that Violet Evergarden had a lot of. There was a particular animation director role associated with that, and Otominoru was kind of like the protege Takahashi Hiroyuki. Oda then directed his first episode for KyoAni with 2018 Sudene, and then he was one of 5 unit directors on 2019 Sound Euphonium, the movie Our Promise, A Brand New Day. Just a great title for that film. And I'll just stop and note, again, this is like the exact same career path we've seen with a lot of people, including the unit director, one of the unit directors for this movie, Miyaki Ryo. So this is that kind of way that they've brought people up. So that happened with him with the Sound Euphonium movie. Following the arson attack, Oda followed in the footsteps of Takahashi Hiroyuki, who had tragically died in that attack, and Oda was the music animation director for Sound Euphonium 3. Oda has also directed notable episodes on all of KyoAni's post-arson shows, as well as continuing to do lots of key animation for basically everything they've done. But his crowning achievement at KyoAni to date, and one of the things that makes this announcement very exciting, is that he was the storyboard artist and director for episode 5 of City the Animation, which was the crazy episode with the split screen and the, Where's Waldo scene and all that stuff. That was his episode. This will now be his first turn as a full director for a series at KyoAni.
I'm so excited by this because we've noticed his name a bunch in the recent works, particularly on City the Animation. And yeah, I love that we're going to see what he's up for on this show. And that trailer is very visually striking. So I'm very excited for this.
Yes. The other KyoAni credit we have is character design and chief animation director, which is Okamoto Kohei, who this is another kind of newer person at KyoAni. He was an animator and animation director at KyoAni since the mid-2010s and started to move up with Free the Final Stroke, which was the last Free movie, which has just, I think, an unfortunate English title. I probably would not have given that. I mean, I get it. They're swimming. I understand they're swimming. But the sexy boy movie, I probably wouldn't call The Final Stroke if it was up to me in English. But he was not responsible for that. On that movie, he was the chief animation director. He was an assistant episode director for episode 13 of Sound Euphonium. That obviously had music stuff in it, so that had a couple of episode directors on it. And his first solo episode direction was for episode 10 of City the Animation. This is his first character design credit and his first chief animation director credit for a TV series. And so both Okamoto and Otominoru, this is their first time at this kind of top level position on a KyoAni show. Then we have 2 additional credits we were given. These are outside people. Series composition, so the head writer is Urahata Tatsuhiko. As is usual for KyoAni on these kinds of adaptations, they typically go to outside writers. Urahata has like a huge career. He's been been the head writer for anime since the early 2000s. Some big shows you might have heard of that he's the head writer for is Baki, Hajime no Ippo, and for me personally, the credit that stood out the most is Monster, the Urasawa Naoki anime adaptation of that guy's manga. Monster's an incredible show. If you have not seen it, it recently got a Blu-ray release by Discotek. Which I've been meaning to pick up and watch because Monster's really good. And if the guy who did that adaptation is doing this, that's a pretty fucking big vote of confidence. And then the other credit, and I think this one's very interesting, is world setting. Is the general way this credit's been translated. This is Suzuki Takaaki. We have talked about him before. He's a writer, historical advisor, and designer who's worked on a lot of anime and various other projects like games. But very notably, he has had this very particular and peculiar credit, world setting. That is the same credit he had on Violet Evergarden. So he was like a major aesthetic designer for Violet Evergarden that helped design the way that world looked. And if you watch the trailer for this, I think you can see that kind of DNA in this sort of, still like steampunk, but this is a much grungier version of that than Violet Evergarden had. But I think especially because Otominoru has a big connection to Violet Evergarden, that was like a show he was much more heavily involved in than he had been at any previous KyoAni show. I think you can kind of see a little bit of that DNA there, while still obviously being something different. It's not just another Violet Evergarden, but you can see some of that in there, and I think that's pretty cool.
This is awesome, and it really feels like KyoAni is back in full swing, right?
Yes.
We've had a movie this year. We had City, which was, more than anything, City felt like a statement of what KyoAni can still do, and now it feels like, and City also felt transitionary because it was their first work after the arson attack that was not a direct sequel to something they'd done before, although it had a clear link to Nichijou, right? But now we're moving on to something completely new, no connection to anything else. And I just, I'm really happy that we're getting this and that they're still trucking along and doing awesome work. And this is going to be something we will definitely talk about in 2026.
Yes, we will have to reconvene our Kyoto vacation. Yeah, and I'm hugely excited for it. People have not watched the trailer. Go watch the trailer. It looks fucking awesome. And it looks like you can see a lot of those KyoAni touches, but it also looks like something new. It doesn't just look like this is, the next show by Ishihara Tatsuya. It doesn't look like that. It doesn't, Oda Minoru is clearly not trying to ape the, sort of house KyoAni style. It's something new. It's something different. The setting seems just really cool. So yeah, I'm hugely excited. I'm very happy that they are, doing the same thing that we have seen previously in years past with the Yamada Naoko, with Ishidate Taichi, with Yamamura Takuya, who we didn't cover Tsurune, but he was the director for Tsurune. It's cool that we're getting this kind of next phase with Oda Minoru. Who knows, maybe Miyake Ryo will be in that kind of capacity as well soon. We obviously have whatever Ishihara Tatsuya is going to work on next. We've got whatever Ishidate Taichi. Who knows what projects those directors will move on to. But I'm with you that it feels like KyoAni is kind of like back in a whole new era, a whole new phase, in the kind of like out of this kind of transition of dealing with the fallout of everything that happened in 2019 with the arson attack. It feels like we are now in this whole new world for Kyoto Animation, which means that in 2026, we will be in a whole new part for our Kyoto vacation with whatever part 9 will be, but I'm sure it will be very, very exciting.